I've been driving around over the last while. Have you noticed those signs along the side of the road from time to time that say, another project by the Canadian Foodgrains Bank? Ever wondered what that means? Well, if you do, you're in the right place. We have some representatives from those folks with us this morning. On behalf of the Missions Committee, it's my honor to introduce them to you. I have a confession. I was up Christmas Eve, 2:45 in the morning, with a coffee in one hand and a snack in the other, and rewarding myself for doing such. And I was sitting there thinking, have you ever had those oddball thoughts on how many meals have I eaten in my lifetime? Or how much have I eaten in my lifetime? So I put a pencil to it. I have eaten 29,607 meals. And you're thinking, how old are you? And if I do the math, I've eaten, if I take the bottom end of the average daily intake of a North American, I put it in at 1.75 pounds per day, I've eaten 29.67 tons of food. Where do I go with that? I got thinking, for the first number of months when I was born, it was rather foggy. I really don't remember, but I do remember vaguely in my mind of sitting in a high chair, and then when I was 12, I was able to move on to a chair at the table with the other family members. But I thought, 20 years my mom has looked after me and fed me. Actually 22 years, and then she gave up and gave over to my wife, Diane. And she's, I think, teaching Sunday school in the basement. She's maybe planning lunch for me, but she's looked after me for 50 plus years. And what really struck me, I have never, ever once sat at the table where either my wife or my mother has looked at me and, Dave, I know you're hungry. I have some bad news. I'm really sorry. The cupboards are empty. There's nothing to eat. And tomorrow isn't looking a whole lot better. Never once in my lifetime, simply because of the family I was born into, the day and age in which I was born into, and the country in which we live. And I was talking to our guest, Norah, here a couple months ago, excuse me, in preparation for today, and I said, our problem in the Western world, we really don't appreciate what hunger really means. I personally don't know what that looks like. And I'm sure maybe there's others of you who feel the same way. And she said to me, I'll never forget that. She says, well, we're going to come and we're going to help you with that. So we have representatives from the Canadian Foodgrains Bank with us this morning, Norah Martin and Steve McInnes. They've driven all the way from Woodstock. Thank you so very much for driving the distance to be with us. I've been very much looking forward to what you have to say. They were in Africa, Malawi, 2 years ago, she told me this morning. What did you see? What do you know? So welcome to Auburn, welcome to the Missionary Church here, and welcome to the microphone.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Pastor Mike, who very graciously allowed us to rebook when December 28th wasn't looking so good. And I understand from your announcements that that was not the only time that you've had to pivot and do other things this winter. And that's not surprising because we have as well. We were supposed to be having a major snowstorm last weekend, and therefore our church service was actually canceled in view of the weather forecast. So yeah, it's been a winter, and I kind of enjoy it because Steve does the shoveling. Fair division of labor. I do the knitting, he does the shoveling. Okay, what is it like to be really hungry? That is quite a question. Most of us who pay any attention to the news at all have a keen sense that Jesus' words in Matthew, "The poor you have always with you," are painfully true. In fact, they are so overwhelmingly true that we are tempted just to switch off. We don't want to hear it. There are poor people in our midst. They wander the streets of our towns. I don't know about Auburn, but certainly in Woodstock, we have homeless people. We have people who don't know for sure where the next meal is coming from. They show up in our soup kitchens, and even at one point in Woodstock, they came into our church on a Sunday morning to beg from the congregation. There are also poor people in other countries. We see their pictures on our screens and in our newspapers and read about the unimaginable disasters that create and increase poverty and hunger in many countries. But just because we always have the poor with us, that is no excuse for us not to do what we can to help alleviate suffering wherever we see it. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells the parable of the sheep and the goats. How many remember that? Of course you do. The sheep and the goats. And he says in the end, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." Just before the feeding of the 4,000 in Mark, Jesus said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat." That's hunger. They were far from home. The disciples were overwhelmed, just like us, and suggested that people be sent to the nearby villages to buy food. But Jesus only asked them what food they had. They had 7 loaves and a few fish. Jesus took the bread, and after he prayed, the disciples distributed the food for all to eat their fill, and there were 7 baskets of scraps left over. They actually gave the food to the people. I imagine that for the disciples, the crowd of 4,000 people must have seemed as unimaginably too many to feed as the number of hungry people in our world does to us. 720 million is the number I have read on the Canadian Foodgrains Bank website. 720 million. I can't imagine that number. Yet when Jesus asked them what they had, they produced it and they obeyed when he said to distribute it to the people. There may be a lesson in that for us. To be obedient even when something seems impossible is a real test of faith. Can you imagine? I've got this scrap of bread in my hand, and Jesus has said, "Go and feed the people." And you're thinking, good luck with that. In James 2:15-17, the writer talks about faith and works and the relationship between them. He says, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, 'Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Part of our acting out of faith must be to help people who are in need, as Jesus did. When Jesus said, 'I have compassion,' he wasn't just feeling sorry for the people, the way you feel sorry for somebody that you see on TV. He was about to do something to aid them in their plight. Likewise, we need to address ourselves in whatever way we can to the needs we see overseas as well as at home, and do what we can to help alleviate the problem." I noticed in your foyer that you have a food bank drop-off place. That's to feed the people here. Well, Canadian Foodgrains Bank is an organization that is set up to help alleviate the problem of hunger around the world for those other people that don't live next door to us or in our town. It is an international partnership based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the vision of which is a world without hunger. And if you see my t-shirt, it says End Hunger. And on the back, it says it in a whole bunch of different languages. But it's cold this morning, so I'm wearing my sweater. Where am I? In aid of ending hunger, it works through local partners overseas to meet emergency food needs, to create long-term solutions to hunger wherever possible, and to foster informed action by Canadians, that would be you, and governments, that would be our government, to support this international cause. It was started back in the 1980s and has grown to comprise 15 member organizations involving nearly 30 Christian denominations across Canada, including your own, the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada. One way it raises money is through local growing projects, groups of farmers and other interested people who grow crops to sell and send money to Canadian Foodgrains Bank. The Foodgrains Bank started off as an organization of farmers who had excess grain and they wanted to send it to people who didn't have enough to eat. It was a laudable, worthy cause. Eventually, they figured out that it was far more efficient in every possible way to monetize the crops and send the money overseas so that they could buy food that was locally grown, or at least in that same region of the world that would be familiar to people, and so on. Okay, the money raised is matched 4-to-1 by the Canadian government, up to $25 million a year. And that has been in place for many years now, and we are grateful for the support and pray that it will continue or even grow, even in spite of pressures to cut back on support for foreign aid. You may have heard what happened to USAID. It was just stopped dead. People are hungry because of it. The strength of Canadian Foodgrains Bank lies in its emphasis on working with trustworthy local partners, people and groups of people in the developing world who have a knowledge of local culture, politics, and history, much better than we know. They develop and implement projects on the ground with support by Canadian Foodgrains Bank when needed in design and implementation of projects. And before you ask, the accounting for use of the money is very carefully carried out. And if you want to know more about how that is done and where the money goes and so on, then you can find out by looking on the Canadian Foodgrains Bank website. There's lots of information available for you. The people in front of Jesus in Mark 4 were hungry because they had come to follow Jesus without bringing with them a sufficient supply of food. They probably didn't realize they were going to be with him 3 days. But fascinating. The causes of hunger in our world today are very complex. As you can imagine, everything is. Way too many people suffer from food insecurity, not knowing where their next meal will come from, or if they'll have one at all. Why are they hungry? Is it because they are lazy or perhaps bad managers? Not hardly. It is because of poverty and inequality, conflict, discrimination, and the list goes on. And we ignore the problem at our peril. I heard the other day that there is an African proverb something like this: no peace, no bread. But then it goes on, no bread, no peace. If we want a peaceful world, we have to feed the hungry. So what is our response to this information and data? Oh, and by the way, I have a few numbers for those of you that like numbers. 70% of people who experience hunger produce food for a living. Isn't that ironic? 60% of people who experience hunger live in countries affected by conflict. That's not surprising. This one will break your heart. 20% of people who experience hunger are under 5 years of age. And if you're wondering why we work overseas, 98% of people who are hungry live in developing countries. So what is our response? Well, first of all, it's not just data, numbers on a page. Every one of those 720 million people is an individual, a brother or sister, as the writer of James says, just like you and me, with their own dignity and worth. We need to understand that fact and act accordingly. I'd like to focus on one woman in particular, as she was my hostess for an overnight stay in a village in Mulanje district in Malawi, which is a tiny country in southeastern Africa. And you can see the map on the screen. The green part is, can you flip back? Back? Yeah, thank you. The green part is Malawi. It's a very tiny country and very, very poor. I was there on a food security learning tour with Canadian Foodgrains Bank in November of 2023. And one of the things that happened while I was there was I had the privilege of staying with a woman in the village for a night. I was part of a group of 11 or 12 people from Canada who were doing this learning tour. On the day I'm thinking of, we were standing in a circle along with those families and individuals who had volunteered to host us. We had just been told that the hosts would choose whom they wanted to host. And immediately, I was taken back in my mind to the days in elementary school when people would choose teams. Am I going to get chosen, or will I be the last one standing? Well, Mrs. Mpamba, the next slide, please, Jake. Jake is my new best friend. He does the slides. Mrs. Mpamba, bless her heart, came straight over to me and claimed me. And that was her attitude from that time till we hugged goodbye on the following afternoon. I was hers and was treated like an honored guest who was also there to learn. And this slide is Mrs. Mpamba. She is wearing a t-shirt exactly like mine, as you can see. While I stayed with Mrs. Mpamba and her family, I learned about preparing eggplant for dinner. Next slide, please. And this is Mrs. Mpamba in her cooking room. I would hesitate to call it a kitchen, but I guess that's what it was. It's a 3-sided room off her courtyard where she has her little stove, where she feeds the twigs and the branches into the stove to burn to cook her food. I learned about cooking eggplant for dinner, about feeding the goats. I don't have a picture of that. Digging holes in the fields for seeds, and working in the field. I think I have a slide for that. Next slide, please. Yes, that's me in the red skirt and the blue top. And that's Mrs. Mpamba standing in the background, supervising, making sure I do it right. And about watering the tomato and eggplant seedlings with water carried up from the dregs of the nearly dry river nearby. Next slide, please. And that is Mrs. Mpamba watering the plants by hand. They're seedlings at this point. But most of all, my friends, I learned about true generosity of spirit and about how precarious life can be depending on where you live in the world. Mrs. Mpamba was, as I discovered through the time I was with her, the chief of her village, a woman of great personal dignity and kindness. She and her husband owned a brick house with several rooms and fields for growing crops. They're small fields, but they're fields. By local standards, they were pretty well off. However, in 2023, there were 2 cyclones back to back, and they completely trashed this woman's crops. And so they didn't have anything left to eat for the year. To tide them over till the next harvest, they were part of a cash distribution project run by CARD, Churches Action in Relief and Development, which was Canadian Foodgrains Bank's local partner. Cash distribution simply means that rather than giving them food, they were given the money and the wherewithal to buy what they needed in the local markets, because there was food available. Not everybody's crops were trashed, but the people that were in that situation had money to buy food, and they were given seedlings to grow for vegetables in the meantime. Before it was time for me to leave, Mrs. Mpamba took a few minutes out of her busy activities to make a speech in which she thanked me for helping her with her work and staying at her house. She expressed how honored she was by my presence. I was just about crying. I was indescribably touched. I tried to express in my turn how honored I was by her opening her home and making me feel like part of the group. What an honor. This is a woman who has known true poverty. Without the help from Canadian Foodgrains Bank, she and her family might have starved to death. But because of that help, they were able to actually give. Mrs. Mpamba is only one among a number of people and groups we met on this tour, but I hope that her story has given you a feel for the people whom Canadian Foodgrains Bank, through its partners, including your church, is helping not only to survive, but to thrive. The goal of these people is that they should be able to support themselves independently. Who wouldn't want to support themselves independently? We all pray that the crops in years to come will flourish and the harvest will be abundant. Not only enough to sustain them for the year, but maybe a little bit left over to sell for necessities. I don't know if the 4,000 people thanked Jesus for the food, but I can tell you that one thing all the partners in the various projects we visited had in common was their gratitude for the support of people like you and their hope that it will continue until they can be sure of positive outcomes. When they expressed this gratitude to us, we assured them that we would pass it on. And that's one of the things that I'm here to do this morning. What can you do in the face of overwhelming need? What can you do to give yourself hope? You can pray. Pray for the partners who really want to be independent, and pray for Canadian Foodgrains Bank and the organizations on the ground throughout the world. Canadian Foodgrains Bank isn't the only one. You can get involved with a growing project. I believe there's one in Blythe, and some of you may already have been involved in that. Or set up some other fundraising effort. I mean, growing projects aren't the only way to raise money. Believe me. You can educate yourselves. Look up what is happening in places around the world other than just what makes the headlines. And we all know who makes the headlines. and what other organizations are doing to help. Canadian Foodgrains Bank has a very good website, and there's lots of information on it. That's a good place to start. You can advocate when your conversation with friends, even people that aren't here this morning, turns towards using tax dollars for foreign aid or church dollars for foreign aid. You can tell your friends what you learned about the need and the worthiness of these people to receive whatever help we can offer them. They are human beings just like ourselves with their own dignity. And if you really want to advocate, thank you, Steve, you can send a postcard. I have a whole bunch of these. And on the back it says, I'm proud to live in a country that plays a key role in making the world a better place and does its part to end hunger. Canadian aid helps improve livelihoods, builds stronger local and global economies, and contributes to a more stable and peaceful world for us all. As a global leader in agriculture and food, Canada should help communities around the world dealing with rising food prices, climate change, and conflict by prioritizing support for agriculture and food systems. It's all written out for you. All you have to do is put your address and your name and the date, and it gets sent to the Office of the Secretary of State for International Development in Ottawa. Writing your own letter to the same people is even better. Handwriting your letter to the same people is even better. But this is a good start, and I have them, and they will be available at the coffee hour after church if you're interested. And you can give. Organizations like this can use all the money we can raise. Thank you for this opportunity to share my passion for feeding hungry people wherever we find them. I pray God's blessing on you and your efforts to share with those in need and put your faith into action, whatever that looks like for you. Jesus said, I have compassion. Can we do any less? Thank you.